The first thing you notice is the silence at the table, not the ordinary quiet of a house that works from dark to dark, a different silence. She sets the plate down in front of you and her hand doesn't linger the way it used to. She fills the cup, she turns back to the stove, and something you cannot name has already left the room and taken its coat with it. I sat across from that silence for years, and I told myself it was tiredness. I told myself it was the babies. I told myself a great many things, because a man in my position is taught to explain a woman to himself before he ever thinks to ask her. I noticed everything. I want you to understand that from the start. I was not a blind man. I saw the change come over each of them after the children came, saw it the way you see weather move across a field before it reaches you. And I said nothing, not to her, not to the bishop, not to the other men who would have nodded and told me it was natural and handed me my hat. I carried what I noticed the way I carried everything else in that life, quietly and alone, and for far too long. Let me tell you who's speaking, so you know what kind of account this is. I grew up old order, and I spent my whole life inside it. As a son, then a husband, then a man other men came to when they needed something enforced. I'm not one of the women who left and finally got to speak. I'm the other thing. I'm the one who held the rules in his two hands and made sure they held. If you want to understand this world from the side that gave the orders instead of the side that took them, then stay and subscribe, because you will not hear this said out loud in many other places. And tell me in the comments, do you think a man like me knew what he was doing? I read everyone. Most of what you've heard about this world comes from the women who left, and every word of it is true. But there's another side, the men who were handed the rules and told to enforce them. I was one of those men for 31 years, and the things I held the deepest, the things a man in my position was never permitted to say out loud, I couldn't fit into a video. So I wrote them down. A book called The Weight a Man is Given. The link is in the first comment and the description, and I'll tell you more before the end. For now, stay with me. Here's what people outside don't understand about how we were taught to see a wife. There were 3 things a man in my district was raised to watch for after a woman became a mother, and not one of them had anything to do with what she felt. The first was her strength. Could she still rise before the lamp, still carry the wash, still stand at the stove with a child on her hip, and never let the work fall behind? Her body had done the one thing it was for, and now the question was whether it would return to service. I watched for that the way you watch a horse after a hard winter. I am ashamed of that now. I was not ashamed of it then. The second was her steadiness. A woman was expected to fold back into the household without a ripple. If she wept where it was not seen. If something in her had gone quiet and dark, that was between her and God, and a good wife did not bring it to the table. We had a word for a woman who could not manage it. We said she was struggling with her spirit, and we said it low, the way you'd talk about a crack in a foundation you'd already decided not to fix. The third was her submission. And this is the one I need you to sit with. After a child came, a woman was softer, more tired, more folded inward, and a man was taught to read that not as a wound but as a gift. She was easier to lead now. She asked for less. She had less left over to want things with. I heard men call that a blessing. I called it that myself, once, and I have never forgotten the sound of my own voice saying it. Those were the 3 things we watched for: strength, steadiness, submission. Now, let me tell you what I actually saw, which was none of those things, because a man who watches long enough eventually sees past what he was trained to look for. What I saw was that each time she gave us a child, a little more of her went out of her eyes and did not come back. I saw it after the first, faintly. I told myself I imagined it. After the third, I could not tell myself that any more. She would stand at the window in the last light with her hands still wet from the basin, looking at nothing, at the lane, at the dark coming down over the fields, and there was a whole country in her face that I was not a citizen of and had never once asked to enter. I noticed she stopped humming. Small thing. A man is not supposed to keep account of a small thing like that. But she used to hum at the wash line, some old tune with no words that her own mother must have hummed, and one spring I understood I had not heard it in a year. I noticed she'd begun to answer me before I finished speaking, quick, smooth, agreeable, and it took me longer than it should have to understand that a wife who agrees that fast has stopped expecting to be asked. I noticed she held the newest baby a beat too long some nights after it was already asleep, like the child was the last warm thing in a cold house, and I was standing right there. I noticed, and here is the sin of it, I noticed, and I was relieved. Because a woman who has gone quiet inside is a woman who does not make a household difficult. The very thing that was dying in her was the thing that made my life run smooth. I understood that clearly, and I chose the smooth life. God forgive me, for years I chose it, and I called the choosing peace. There's a part of this I can't get to here in the few minutes a video gives me. So I wrote it down instead, slowly, without the softening every algorithm asks for. It's The Weight a Man is Given. 10 chapters, each one built around a single thing a man like me carries. An anvil, a black ledger, a lantern at the end of a lane, and what each one really cost the people I love. It's the confession of a man who held the authority and mistook the control for love. The link is in the first comment and the description. That's where the part I couldn't say out loud lives. Let me tell you about another man's wife, because I will not pretend mine was the only one. There was a family down the road from us. He was a hard man, harder than me, and proud of it. His wife had 7 children before she was 30. And I remember a summer when she began to move through the churchyard like a woman under water. Slow, far away, her eyes never quite reaching yours. The women knew. The women always knew first. They gathered around her at the frolics, quiet, close, doing her share of the work without a word said, the way they did for a woman whose spirit had gone under. That is a mercy the women built with their own hands, in the silence, because no one else would build it. And her husband? He came to me one evening, troubled, and asked me, man to man, the way we did, whether I thought she needed discipline because she had grown distant and slow. Discipline. That was the word he reached for because it was the only word our world had handed him for a woman in that much pain. I have thought about that conversation more than almost any other in my life, because I did not say to him what I knew. I did not say, she is drowning, and you are asking me how to hold her head down more firmly. I nodded. I told him to be patient and to pray. I sent him home to her. That is the kind of enforcement I did, not with my hands. With my silence at the exact moment a word might have mattered. Here's what I've come to understand, out here, with more years behind me than ahead. The rules were never really about God. I believe they were for most of my life. But a rule that requires a woman to disappear a little more with each child she gives you and calls her disappearance obedience. That rule is not protecting a household. It is feeding on one. We were taught that a wife's quiet was peace. It was not peace. It was the sound of something being spent, and there's a difference between a debt paid and a life spent, and I spent 31 years unable or unwilling to hear it. I want to be honest about the whole of it. The way I've learned honesty is only worth anything whole. That life gave me things I will not stand here and spit on. It gave me a community that raised a barn in a day when a man's own burned. It gave me work that meant something in my hands, and neighbors who would die for you, and a faith that, wounded as it is now, I have not fully set down. The men in it were not devils. I was not a devil. That is the hardest part to make people understand. That ordinary, decent men who loved their wives in the only shape love was permitted to take, did this, and called it care, and never once saw the woman going out like a lamp in front of them. I know, now, what I was really watching for. All those years I told myself I was watching for strength. I was watching to see how much a person could carry before they stopped asking to be seen. And every one of them carried more than I ever let on that I noticed. That was the thing I told no one. Not that she was strong, that I saw what her strength was costing her, saw it plainly, the price written across her face at the window every evening, and I let her go on paying it, because the paying kept my house quiet. If you are a woman who went quiet like that, in a house where your quiet was called peace, I see you now, even if the man across your table never said he did. And if you are a man who noticed something dying in the person beside you and chose the smooth life over the hard word, I know exactly the weight you're carrying, because I carried it too, and I carried it far too long before I ever set it down. If you want the rest, the full account from a man still standing inside the thing he's describing, not at the end of it, it's all in The Weight a Man is Given. Links in the first comment and the description. 240 pages of what I was never allowed to set down anywhere else. Open the drawer with me. Until next time, light the fire, but don't forget to speak.